Hot takes, everybody's got them. Some good, some bad, some, questionable. But while we may all have differing opinions, I think that's great. Hot takes get people talking, and you know, it's nice to discuss certain ideas or thoughts that you can't help but have, despite the mean things that may be hurled at you. On that note, I decided that it'd be a good idea to sit down and check out the Titanfall 2 community to see what sort of hot takes have been brewing for this, wow, 8-year-old game. God, I feel old. So with that, I sent out a message in a couple places hoping to get a couple of responses. Okay, well, I certainly didn't expect that many responses. It'll take some time to get through them all, so sit back and relax as I read through a bunch of these takes. Some hot, some cold, some sort of in the middle, and, you know, I'll try to give my own 2 cents on some of the most interesting ones. But first, let's start with my own hot take. I think as a whole, Titanfall 2 still has a lot of potential for making good and interesting content. More specifically, long-form YouTube content. And you may say, Reach, this is an 8-year-old game that hasn't received a sizable update in, well, forever. I feel like every idea has been exhausted. And to be honest, when I hear something like this for really any game, I get a little offended because, you know, it feels a bit shallow. Take a look at a game like Team Fortress 2. Titanfall 2's more illustrious and estranged cousin. Despite being 17 years old, the difference between content made between the two cannot be made more apparent. Now of course, TF2 is going through a quite understandably turbulent period right now, but ignoring that fact, let's compare the average videos between the two, save for the hashtag FixTF2 videos in the span of 1 week. Let's see what we got here. Gameplay video that talks about gameplay, or personal journey you might say. Video that talks about a weapon, a mix of data analysis and game analysis, video that talks about weapons, plural, a meme gameplay type of video, or an EXE if you will, and whatever this video is. TF2 anomaly. The important thing here is that there's variety, and that these are all sort of interesting to an extent. And then there's Titanfall 2. Essay on the state of the community, that's pretty good. Let's see, full campaign walkthrough. I mean, sure, I guess. I mean, this game has been out for a while, but let's mention the fact that there's already a couple long videos like this where it's literally just the campaign of Titanfall 2 with no extra substance. So, in this case, this video is only worth watching if A, you've never played the campaign ever, or B, you really want to watch the entirety of the campaign again in 4K 60 FPS. Then again, I guess more power to you. The Legacy of Titanfall 2. Now that's a good watch. Let's see, mod skin showcase of a weapon, very nice, but it's something pretty basic. An EXE type video, sure, a personal gameplay journey video, and finally, another gameplay video. Now of course, no hate to the Titanfall 2 creators, but I feel like there's only maybe 2 of these videos I would most definitely watch. As for why, it's just, well, the other videos don't really jump out to me. Now of course, I will say that yes, obviously Titanfall 2 content in general is harder to make because it simply isn't as popular as other titles. But I truly believe that if more people step up, there could be an evolution of content, and hell, we could discover new things about the game we love. Like, for example, I can tell you right now that there is a lack of up-to-date tutorials, analysis videos, and speedrunning videos. And I want to emphasize speedrunning here because Titanfall 2 is a movement game. A really good movement game. And yet, I'm not seeing anyone do any breakdowns of levels, mechanics, you know, all that technical stuff. I think it's high time we get a Shonik for our community, don't you think? But anyways, I think that's a pretty good starter hot take, so let's see what you guys cooked up. Starting off, it's no surprise that multiplayer was by far the most popular subject of all the hot takes. This is a big one, so I'm going to focus on this first section here. Amped Hardpoint is such a great mode, but ends up criminally underused. It's different from any other similar mode in competing games, it's super fast-paced, risk-reward chess, while most others are checkers, and I wish it had been featured more. I sort of agree. Now, I'm a big fan of objective game modes. Domination, payload, bounty hunt, modes that allow you to win without having to just shut off your brain and mindlessly kill whatever is in front of you. However, the reason why and I imagine so many other people don't play this mode is because it's slow. Sure, it's definitely faster than other similar game modes in other games, but when you compare this mode to the other modes in Titanfall 2, it feels a lot slower. At least in Bounty Hunt, when you're camping zones, you're at least killing things to pass the time. In Amped Hardpoint though, you're encouraged to just sit there and roleplay as a sentry until you capture the point, which is further amplified if you want to amp the hardpoint, which is the whole point of the mode. There is a sort of saving grace though, because while this mode definitely suffers in the vanilla map pool, if you head into the private match settings, you can actually find that Amped Hardpoint is available on the live fire maps. And let me tell you, without the presence of Titans and overall way tighter combat spaces, this mode flows 100 times better on these maps. Northstar takes no skill to play and is almost as annoying to fight as Tone. Well, no. Every Titan takes skill to play, and trust me, you'll know the difference between a bad and a good Northstar player. It takes skill to hit your shots, it takes skill to have spatial awareness, and it definitely takes skill to know what abilities you should be using at the right time. As for whether it's more annoying to fight a Tone versus a Northstar, it really depends on the map you're playing on, the Titan you're running, and again, the skill level of everybody involved. Legion and Northstar just absolutely ruin my enjoyment of the game at times. I play nothing but Scorch, so this is not me saying that they are turbo OP. I'm just frustrated that there's two Titans which can essentially completely shut down my favorite. Look, I get it, man. Sometimes you want to sit down and play your favorite Titan, but you can't really complain about it because at the end of the day, you're the one playing Scorch. Me being a huge prick aside, I can tell you this. Just focus on what you can do. Assuming you're playing something like Attrition, just avoid their sightlines and wait for them to get close or for them to let their guard down so you can move in. In the meantime, you can farm points from the AI or the occasional enemy pilot that comes your way. Because at the end of the day, there's some games you just can't win no matter what. But what's important is that you don't try to force yourself to have fun. Okay, before I start, I love Titans, and I'm not hating on them, I just find the fast-paced action of pilots a little more enjoyable, especially when you get that Titan kill. And you know what, dweeb that writes? That is perfectly okay. In fact, I'd be more surprised if your take was the opposite, since the pilot movement is what usually draws in people the most. From random user here, this is another long one, so I'll focus on the first part here. Legion takes skill and is more boring than Tone. Personally, I agree with this. Sort of. Some of you may crucify me for this, but I actually do enjoy the burst gameplay of Tone a bit more than Legion. However, I think Legion does require a bit more skill due to the fact that he's all about positioning, and the fact that his kit requires a bit more precision than a Tone's. But like I said before, every Titan requires skill, and in the end, it all comes down to the person playing it. The Smart Pistol is fine. It's not that hard to counter, and it's literally a boost. Overall, people complain way too much in-game. There's no ranks or anything, so the only purpose of playing this game is to have fun. Why don't we act like it? Totally! Whenever I do hear complaints of somebody using the car, the Smart Pistol, etc., I can't help but roll my eyes a little. Sure, it can be annoying, and sure, it can be kinda scummy if somebody is effortlessly stomping the lobby, but you know, it's an 8-year-old game. These people aren't going to be really going anywhere as long as there's a player base, so I mean, what else can you do? At this point, we have to accept that fact, and if you find yourself really getting pressed, well, go take a break. It's not like this is a 9-to-5 job you have to force yourself to endure. It's a video game, and it will always be just that. Cloak low-key kinda sucks. I've never been snuck up on by a Cloak player. They usually sit in the back with a Spitty or a Devotion in camp. Now, Cloak isn't the best tactical in the game, but I mean, it has its uses. Personally, I feel like this kit is definitely made for getting the drop on Titans rather than pilots, but even then, like you pretty much said, Cloak is an environmental check to see if you're paying attention or not. If you're at least aware, Cloak is usually never really a big problem. As for camping, well, I'd rather deal with a good Cloak camper than a good AWOL camper. Ronin in Northstar is just not that good. Well, no, that is wrong. Very, very wrong. For one, Ronin is quite possibly, if not the best pub stomper Titan in the game due to his very fast movement, survivability with a sword block, and high damage output. Combined with his natural extended melee range, there's a reason why he's a sushi chef. Now, the reason why you may think Ronin isn't that great could simply be that you just haven't run into many good Ronin mains, as to be honest, they're kinda rare nowadays. And trust me, the difference between a good Ronin and a bad one is very, very apparent. As for Northstar, they're the Titan with the highest potential for long-range damage. That's why on certain maps in certain modes, take LTS on Rise for example, here Northstars can absolutely dominate due to the long sight lines and limited cover. And so, most other people have no choice but to choose Northstar themselves, or they have to get super creative to even attempt to push up without sustaining heavy damage. I don't think in any universe that can be considered not good. Now, these following takes are about something that I didn't even realize was a problem until I started seeing them pop up. And I guess you can realize that yes, apparently the Kraber is a hot topic. Now personally, I've never really thought about the Kraber in a bad light. Like, at all. I had always thought of the Kraber as a super high skill and fair sniper rifle. The fact that anyone would even try sniping in this game with such fast movement, well, honestly, I found it a bit respectable even if they were camping. But looking at these takes, I can see why people would be upset with it. Imagine if you took the Kraber into any other game. You end up with a super reliable one-shot kill behemoth anywhere on the body. That is broken. Remember Apex? Yeah, imagine the Kraber in that game was the same as the one in Titanfall 2. People would be furious. And thinking back on it, what can you do against a really good Kraber player? I mean, if there's a guy hitting every conceivable shot, all you can do is hope and pray that they slip up or that you never encounter them. Thus, there's the sniper problem. Now, I'm gonna link a video that talks about this problem in depth because the problem of sniper rifle balancing obviously doesn't just exist in Titanfall 2 itself, so I think a 30-minute long, well-researched video is probably better than me just yapping about it. But, save that for after you're done with the video. Smart Pistol isn't game breaking like so many people claim it to be. It is a bit overtuned, yes, but with the right changes, I feel that it could return to being a primary weapon, and a fairly balanced one at that. In fact, I would argue that doing that would be the correct path for it, as making it a boost forces it to be at least somewhat overpowered to make it worth using. Now, I'm gonna force my own philosophy here, but I feel as though auto-aiming weapons shouldn't really exist at all, at least as a primary option or a secondary option. Mainly because the idea of having a weapon aim for you is kind of dumb. Like, sure, in PvE games, this isn't really a problem because there's no imbalance of enjoyment being had, since the AI can't really feel frustrated. But in PvP games, weapons like this usually end up being unfun, hard to balance, and you lose the need to improve your aim because why do that when the weapon just does it for you? Which is why I like the fact that the weapon is a boost in Titanfall 2 rather than a primary one. Instead of giving it to you outright, you have to earn it. And even then when you get it, it doesn't become the end-all be-all of every fight because with a fast TTK, you can often react when you start getting that player locking on indicator, thus making it balanced, at least in my eyes. Grapple isn't broken, a lot of people are just really good with it. Now, I haven't really heard people call grapple overpowered, but if you are one of those people, well, I agree with this guy. At the end of the day, you're still liable to get shot mid-grapple, and fast movement doesn't automatically make you invincible to bullets. And oh boy, here comes the next hot topic of discussion, Monarch! Look, when it comes to Monarch, I'm a firm believer of this. Monarchs aren't overpowered unless you allow them to be. Like, sure, if you let them get to core 3, then yeah, that's the payout they're gonna get for surviving for so long. So then just target them. I like to think of Monarch as the medic of Titanfall 2. They're always the most valuable pick, and if you leave them alone for too long, it can cause some serious problems down the line. So it's always best to nip them in the bud. A lot of people like to think of Titanfall 2 as, the fast movement go brr type of game, but if you're gonna get down with the Titans, you gotta learn to prioritize your targets and to actually strategize. Attrition is one of the most boring game modes. I have no clue why 99 out of 100 games are attrition. I miss the days where CTF, Amped, Bounty Hunt, and LTS were still active. Well, attrition being one of the most boring game modes is the reason why it is so popular. And no, I don't mean boring in the sense that you want to log off, but boring in the sense that it's a relatively simple game mode. All you have to do is move, shoot, and kill, and that's about it. So as much as I agree with you sadly, us other game mode enjoyers will have to accept the fact that attrition will always be the most popular. The EVA 8 is that dog poop gun, massively outperformed by the Mozambique. I wouldn't say the Mozambique heavily outperforms the EVA 8, it's just that it's more viable in other scenarios due to the fact that the Mozambique has some decent range for a shotgun. However, if we're talking about strictly close range face-to-face combat, the EVA 8 no diffs simply due to the fact that it's a hit-scan weapon. Titan cores run all tactical gameplay for Titan combat. You know what? As crazy as it sounds, I actually sort of agree with this. Because as much as some cores do require some thinking before use, most of the time in a 1v1, it usually ends up being a free win button. As a Ronin, I can't tell you how many times I've absolutely ruined a dude's first Titan drop simply because I whacked them to death with my sword core as soon as that dome shield went down. However, I only really agree with this sentiment in pilot and Titan-based modes like Attrition and Bounty Hunt. In something like Titan Brawl or LTS, I think it's more fair to think of them as ultimate abilities since everyone is able to start off with a Titan, and obviously you have to deal damage to earn them. Most Grenadiers really don't require as much skill as some people say they do. I mean, this is sorta true if you think about it. The Cold War only requires you to aim at the surface a dude is on, so really, it's kind of more luck-based rather than skill-based. Oh, and by luck, I mean if your opponent ever touches the ground or wall. The EBG has the luxury of a 2-shot splash damage, so there's that. And while you can argue that the softball is a skill shot weapon, you can still spam your stickies everywhere, and is bar none the best at effortlessly taking out minions. I will say, however, that the SMR is absolutely a very skillful weapon, and I don't care if I'm coping, it's hard to use, goddammit. The PvE and attrition isn't impactful enough. I'd love for at least a mode where the PvE enemies were hard to kill and more fatal towards players. I feel like this would make team play more important and provide a more interesting attrition experience. I agree. Let's be honest though, I know a lot of players' fantasy of being a one-man army would be shattered if they were constantly under the threat of annihilation from a measly group of grunts. But they really should add some of the enemies from the campaign in Frontier Defense. It would be insanely cool to see grunts with archers, shields, drones, and hell, maybe even the occasional Titan or two. Would be a nice change of pace from constantly getting owned by Reapers. I have no problem with EPG or Spitfire AWOL users. Hey, me neither. Multiplayer lobbies aren't fun anymore. You spend all your time getting stomped by tryhards running around with the car. While it may not always be necessarily with the car, it's an inevitable flaw that Titanfall 2 has, and that's the skill gap. Nowadays, it's not too often you'll see super new players unless there's a sale going on. The reason for this is that the natural skill level of the player base has just naturally gotten better and better. And in a game with such a low TTK and advanced movement mechanics, Titanfall 2 isn't that newbie friendly. With a lack of super in-depth tutorials, a lot of Titanfall 2 is just grinding until you get good. But a lot of people either don't have the patience or time to waste on getting good. Thus, you're left with the more willing and hardcore players who end up being marginally better at the game. I think this issue could definitely be expanded on, but I think I'll save that for another video. Thinking you're superior for not using OP weapons is a cope. Let the new players play OP weapons, let them get kills, don't cry about a Gen 3 with a car when you're 20 gens higher. True! I think when people play with underpowered weapons, they need to realize that not everybody is using the same weapon, and that they need to learn that they're willingly playing with a disadvantage. But when it comes to any weapon, I mean, let's be honest, it's fair game. The real problem is when people have a disregard for pub stomping, they get an ego, and are total losers about it. People don't hack specters enough. I want to see people run around with an army following them and see who gets the bigger army. That would be cool, wouldn't it? I think the reason why people don't do this though is because it simply forces you to stop moving to hack the damn things. And well, that's about it really. Despite how well Respawn implemented movement in this game, the hard truth is that good aim is infinitely more important than good movement, and it always will be. The only thing bad movement does is make it easier to die from weapons that are inferior in the first place. While positioning and your speed do certainly make a difference in gunfights, with such a short TTK, all that really matters is your reaction time, and whether or not you can hit your shots. In that sense, Titanfall 2's base gunplay is exactly the same as Call of Duty, except now, you got the flavor of movement to distract you from it. EPG is a crutch for people who can't play softball. Shit. I hate snipers, but mainly when they are used for camping on top of a building and multiple people are doing it. It's not fun getting one-shotted by an enemy I can't see or get to as they proceed to sit on their butt. In a movement shooter, it completely ruins the feel and best part of the game in my opinion. I totally get it. Let's be honest, nobody really likes getting killed by campers in any game. Oftentimes, it feels like there's no counterplay, and in a fast-paced game like Titanfall 2, it's pretty much seen as the anti-Christ. However, as much as I don't agree with it, people are free to play the game however they wish. Of course, that won't stop me from complaining about it though. If you praise the Smart Core, then you cannot talk shit about the Smart Pistol. For sure, I mean, they basically act in the same way. You have to earn both of them, and depending on who you ask, they're not really super overpowered or frustrating. Probably more so just annoying. Most of the boosts are fricking useless. Whoa there, that's pretty harsh. But you're not completely wrong. It's more so the fact that they feel underpowered, though some of these really don't have the right to exist. Phase Rewind, that's just phase shift backwards with little control. Hollow Pilot Nova? Oh cool, 3 very obvious hollow pilots. Hardcover? Dude, just use an AWOL. The game is way too unbalanced. I mean, how the hell is a grunt like me supposed to stand a chance against a Titan? Way too true, my man. It's so effed up how they treat you guys. Honestly. Spitfire gets way too much hate. It can't be hipfire like the R97, has much lower fire rate, and has higher TTK. Only thing going for it is higher range. It encourages a more careful defensive playstyle. To be honest, the only thing keeping Spitfire hate up is AWOL Spitfire camp, which can be E-smoked or flanked. True. In the hands of a good player, the Spitfire can definitely feel pretty oppressive. But then again, a good person in general will wreck you with any weapon they choose. All the hate for the Spitfire ultimately comes down to the type of playstyle it promotes, and that is honestly quite understandable. Scorch is not the weakest Titan in the game. He is a force to be reckoned with for me usually. Depending on who you ask, you probably would get a bunch of conflicting answers for this. But it all comes down to a player's individual skill, the map you're playing on, and the people you're up against. It would probably be more accurate to say that Scorch has the highest difficulty curve of the Titans, but even then, that's probably debatable. Whilst Tone isn't busted or broken, she is absolutely the most annoying to deal with, bar none. Yes and no. Compared to the behemoth she was before, Tone is very much a balanced and relatively easy Titan. And for certain Titans, yes, she can be very annoying, but remember that every Titan has their strengths and weaknesses. You just have to play your cards right. If you complain about Tone, unless you're new to the game or call her OP because you can't counter her, then you're probably not very good at the game. Oof, that's gonna sting. But yeah, I agree. In fact, that's kind of my whole philosophy in general when it comes to Titans. Compared to pilot combat, I do feel that the Titan v Titan matchups are infinitely more complex in their interactions, and as a result, the skill gap can become the difference between the feeling of operating a giant war machine or an overglorified refrigerator. Pub stomping is worse than a fair match. Well, I mean, sure, nobody likes getting pub stomped, and a fair match is what we should always strive for. Because otherwise, there's an obvious imbalance of enjoyment there to be had, which isn't good for the long term.
The car has the worst and most uncontrollable recoil in the game by a massive margin.
No, Patrick, saying something that is obviously wrong isn't a hot take.
Hollow is the best pilot tactical. For very much unbiased reasons, this is completely and 100% true, no lies here. Complex is the worst map in all of FPS. Oh, okay, you didn't just stop at Titanfall 2, you think it's the worst map in the entirety of the FPS genre. Well, you could certainly argue that Complex could be the worst map in Titanfall 2.
It really isn't.
To say that it's the worst map in all of FPS is quite the bold statement. Objectively, when it comes to game flow, there's not really any maps you can compare Complex to anyways, since Titanfall 2's gameplay loop and feel is pretty unique. But I'd rather hop on a game of Complex than spend 20 minutes on one round of Dust Bowl. Angel City blows.
Ugh, people are gonna hate you for this one.
But I agree. If I had to be completely honest, the high rooftops aren't exactly my cup of tea. But otherwise, I do sort of enjoy this map when everyone isn't on the damn rooftops 24/7. This is a long one, but basically, Scorch needs a rework. He can be very powerful at times and exceedingly weak at times, which is what causes my problem with him. I can imagine why people would say this. Objectively speaking, Scorch is probably one of the more situational Titans due to his sort of restrictive kit. But you know, I think that's okay. In the situations where he does do well, he does a pretty damn good job of doing it. Rather than receiving a rework, it'd probably just be better if he got a buff to his existing abilities. If you played Aegis Titan Brawl before, then you would know how busted he is in that mode. 3 shots in the launcher is quite insane, and it's understandable why he only comes with 1 in the base game. Therefore, if I wanted to buff Scorch, I would probably give him 2 shots in the launcher and some new kits to replace his borderline useless ones. For example, Fuel for the Fire could be changed to give Scorch 2 charges on his Flame Wall. Scorched Earth could be buffed to have increased damage, and the Lingering Flames could last for, I don't know, another 2 to 3 seconds at the cost of not being able to bypass the Doom State, and for a new kit, here's my idea. It would be called Overclock. Basically, the more Thermite damage Scorch accumulates for his core, the faster his handling would be for everything. This means faster reloads, faster shield deployment, faster firewalls, etc. However, this would come at the cost of longer cooldowns and longer handling speeds in the beginning of his deployment. And of course, his buffs reset when his core is used. As for the exact numbers, I don't know, I'm not a game developer. But I feel like this could be a cool thing to implement, as it would be a kit that I think would drastically change how Scorch could be played. SMGs are overpowered and need to be rebalanced. I'm actually gonna disagree with this one. I personally think that SMGs are fine, and that the actual real problem is, again, the time to kill. Because of the low TTK, a lot of the stuff in Titanfall 2 has similar kill times as a result. And so this next take from Sylvie pretty much aligns with what I personally think. The reason why SMGs do feel so powerful though, is because of their ease of use, and not necessarily that they're the end-all, be-all of the weapons in the game. Ronin is a Titan built purely to kill players. That's my hot take. And just think about the sword and shotgun one-shot range and consistency before you disagree. I won't disagree with you actually, because as a G80 Ronin main myself, I like to think I know just a little bit of how to play Ronin. Humble brag aside, if you really think about it, there's not many head-to-head matchups where Ronin comes out on top. For sure, Ronin's easiest matchups are North Star and Tone, but after that, it can certainly get a bit murky. Which is why Ronin's biggest strength in Titan combat is being able to deliver vicious burst attacks after flanking. If you're not doing that though, Ronin's next biggest strength is definitely cutting down all the chaff that comes in the form of pilots and enemy AI. and realistically, that's going to be where the bulk of your points as Ronin are going to come from. Gunrunner is not fun to use or play against. Sure, it motivates players to move, which is the idea in a movement shooter, but it also removes too much of the incentive to move vertically. It's okay to move fast on the ground, but it feels like there isn't a trade between speed while attacking in the air and more control on the ground like there should be. I know this feels nitpicky, but I think the game would feel better if accuracy while gun running was way worse than it is. Gonna have to disagree with you here. In any FPS game, there's always an incentive to be able to move vertically, which is, getting the high ground. And I know you'd talk about there not being a trade-off between attacking in the air or on the ground, but attacking in the air is great. Having to force people to look up at you to shoot you will always be in your favor, unless you come in from an unfortunate angle. Moving vertically isn't also an option in every scenario because eventually you will have to fight in tight spaces, meaning the only option you have to move fast while shooting is slide hopping, just plain sliding, or an awkward jump forward. Gunrunner, I feel, is there to cover the occasional awkward gap in between movement, and instead of treating it as an incentive to move on the ground, I treat it as more of a convenience for when I am on the ground. Because at the end of the day, moving vertically I think will always be better than running on the ground. So basically, this is my stance. Legion doesn't get enough hate.
Okay, but how could you hate this guy?
Amp wall mains are the scum of the earth, purposely rejecting the art of movement so they can become the ultimate World War II pillbox. I'm gonna be honest, I don't even remember the last time I even ran into an amp wall pilot, at least a good one anyways. Sure, camping is always a bit icky, but I don't really have a problem with my amped wall brethren. Northstar has the worst kit in the game, it does not have any synergies. Wrong! Northstar has plenty of synergies. Hell, just her tether traps alone provide a lot of synergy with her kit. So, let me list them. The main point of tether traps is to keep your opponent in place, meaning you can line up easy railgun shots, force the Titan to eat your missile cluster, force the Titan to eat your core, and you can also force the Titan to eat a nuclear ejection, making it actually useful. Now, does Northstar have less synergies in her kit overall? Sure, but that doesn't mean it's the worst kit in the game. Hear me out. Every Titan that isn't Ronin or Monarch is objectively worse, and their kits are bad as well. No. There are right and wrong scenarios for every Titan, and it is a fact that some kits will perform better in some situations than others. This does not exclude Ronin and Monarch. Legion Prime is ugly, best tacticals are Pulse Blade and Hollow Pilot, Smart Core is weak, Titan Brawl is underrated. Yes, no, kind of. And hell yes,
more people should play Titan Brawl.
Hot take, Monarch needs a buff and damage negation.
No.
When it comes to sustaining herself, Monarch already has the shield siphon, the shield she gets off core, and her rearm ability to refresh all of her cooldowns, so I think she's just fine. Capture the Flag is the best game mode.
I mean, it could have been.
Personally, what kills this mode for me is the fact that honestly, some maps don't really feel like they work well with CTF, and the fact that I feel like Titans kind of ruin the whole flow of this mode. SMR is better than CAR, you're just with it. First of all,
minor spelling mistake.
and second of all, I mean, you could say this about any weapon really. If you have good aim, it doesn't matter what gun you use because you're gonna be hitting your shots. So I mean, you can say that the SMR is better than the CAR, but you could also say something like the secondary wingman is better than the CAR. You're just bad with it. Oh well. Kraber is probably the most difficult sniper to master out of any game. I mean, who really knows, right? I think it is a strong contender though, just because of all the speed that's in the game. Scorch counters all, and if you say otherwise, you are stupid. I mean, yeah, if all you do is get into his face and do nothing, I guess. 9 out of 10 times when you die to a pilot sentry, it's your own fault. If you're paying attention, you really shouldn't be dying to a stationary object that looks in a single direction, has a laser beam to show where it is, and can only turn so quickly. This is kind of funny, because I never really thought of the pilot sentry as a super legitimate threat. Guess that's what happens when you play the
Superior Tactical Hollow Pilot.
Jokes aside, I agree with this. Most of the time, it's pretty easy to identify when a pilot sentry is around because like Chill Spirit mentioned, the laser, and the fact that it makes an obnoxiously unique firing sound. Still great though for getting the occasional funny kill. Multiplayer in this game is actually so mid, I'm sorry. You gotta ban like 90% of it to make it bearable / competitive in any way. This is unfortunately very true. It makes sense though, because I doubt Titanfall 2 was developed with the intent of true balance and the spirit of competitiveness. And honestly, as fun as the multiplayer can be, it is very unfriendly to new players with how something as seemingly simple as movement is actually very complex in nature. Combined with the short time to kill, it's kinda easy to see why the game would eventually die out, at least when it comes to long-term mainstream players. Stomping on newbies is actually helpful to them, change my mind. For some people, sure. Getting stomped on can be a learning experience, but if that happens too much, then what's the point? Sure, you could analyze all the minute details every time you get your face stomped in, but at some point, that stops being valuable. At one point, does a newbie need to be stomped in order for them to stop being newbies? Not everybody is like you and me. Some people get owned so hard that they believe that this game isn't for them, and thus quit prematurely when in reality, they probably just got unlucky with their matches or didn't believe in themselves to improve. I may not be able to change your mind on this subject, but as for me, this is where I stand. L-Star is underrated. Now moving on to game design, there were definitely some takes that stuck out to me. One take that was echoed by a decent amount of players is that a lot of the weapons in Titanfall 2 are really similar. So similar in fact that they feel like they blend in with each other. Like with the Kraber, this is a take that I feel you wouldn't normally think about, but when it's laid out in front of you, suddenly you can't ignore it. When it comes down to it, a lot of the weapons in their own respective categories barely differ from each other, at least when it comes down to the time to kill. And so, with few unique mechanics, a lot of the weapons really just feel like the alternate versions of each other. Like, we literally have two versions of the R201. I feel like that's definitely a little odd. While I appreciate what the first game did for the series, I'm not a huge fan of the Titan art style from that game. They all look too bulky and filled with circles. Definitely like the clean edges of most of the Titans from 2 better. For sure, I think in general, a lot of the stuff from Titanfall 2 is just more recognizable due to its more colorful nature. Does that mean the art style and designs from the OG Titanfall are bad? Of course not. But you can't deny that the Titans from Titanfall 2 just pop out more. The Titans would have been better if there were customization options like in Titanfall 1, and if we were given more freedom with personalizing our Titans. Now, I personally haven't played the OG Titanfall, but I can wholeheartedly agree with this. Imagine if our Titans had interchangeable weapons and, you know, more than 1 or 2 useful kits. Something like the quad launcher for Brute could have easily been an alternate weapon for Northstar. But maybe what we currently have is better for the game overall. Like I said earlier, the Titans in Titanfall 2 are very recognizable. So one glance at their chassis, and now you know what exactly you're up against. Whereas in the OG Titanfall, you kinda had to guess what your opponent is exactly running. This game can be better in every way. Better story, gameplay, characters, everything. I mean, sure, the power of hindsight being that we can identify all the flaws the game has years down the line. But let's be honest, this is a really broad statement, and you could say the same thing about, well, every other single video game in existence. Titanfall 2 strays a little too far from the gritty and realisticness of Titanfall 1. Like, it goes from getting to be a designated person, depending on what weapon I am specialized in, to I like neon pink war crime robot. This is a hard agree for me with this one. Let's be real, while the gameplay of Titanfall 2 is a lot smoother than its predecessor, Titanfall 1 had that special sauce. Comparing the cutscenes between the two, it's quite obvious Titanfall 1 was leaning pretty heavily towards the tone of gritty war, with the much more action-packed intros and whatnot. It's crazy to think that in Titanfall 2, nowhere in the multiplayer can you drop into the game from a drop pod. Instead, we get the same old dropship drop, but the only thing you can change is the person who lets you off. Lame! Frontier Defense, while my favorite mode, is so damn lacking. I wish there was at least a pilot-only mode, or endless, just something more than one match type that really loves picking the worst map each time. I know some people get really defensive about Frontier Defense, and years ago, I would probably be yelling at this person for even suggesting the mere thought that Frontier Defense is boring, but when you look at the other PvE modes and games in the market, Frontier Defense really does fall short. For many, it's a mode relegated to leveling up their Titans, or for taking a break from the regular multiplayer. On its own, it lacks worthwhile rewards, is a huge grind, and after a while, the gameplay loop becomes very stale and repetitive. Now, this is where the higher difficulties come in, but really, there's not that much incentive to do them, so it actually becomes pretty rare to even find a match above normal difficulty. If there was one thing I would add to this mode, I would definitely consider adding more upgrades overall, as whatever you can buy in the shop feels kinda lame. Not really a hot take, but people should just stop complaining and try to have fun instead. I get it, some weapons, Titans, etc. were left unbalanced, but so what? It sadly won't be changing, so complaining and overall being rude doesn't help. True. This is an 8-year-old game, and it feels so weird to see people try to dictate how others play or enjoy the game. Like, sure, you can disagree with other people, but you know, there's no need to call each other names or insult each other. Just let go, have fun, and grow up. Auto-aim for controllers is overkill. Controllers are already on the same level with mouse and keyboard, so any additional help is just not fair. Of course, learning a new setup for controllers needs time and effort, but it still proves my take. Let me tell you, as a long-time PlayStation player, who now occasionally plays on PC, KBM is definitely better. Sure, at a base level, you can argue that they're the same, but whether they're cheating or not, people can definitely beam you a lot more on PC. Not to mention the amount of movement tech PCs have access to, like tap strafes, lurch, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Psst, watch Brian Otto's movement tutorial. Now, is aim assist a bit overtuned for controllers? I mean, you could make an argument for it, but it's honestly fine for me, because unlike Apex, movement is a lot more erratic and speedy. Reapers are cool as fuck! They jump like 100 feet, have the best sound effects in the entire game, and can make armies of ticks by themselves. Ticks are annoying? I don't care, man. They look awesome while doing it, they even walk like they don't give a shit, while they annoy you the entire match. Facts, my brother. Spit your shit indeed. All the original Titans look better than their Prime counterpart. Let's be honest, a lot of us got the Prime Titans for their executions alone. Save for Ronin and Northstar, I think every other Titan's Prime chassis is sort of mid or outright terrible. Then again, it's all preference. I know quite a few people already agree with this, but I believe there should be a limit for how many Titans can be out at once in attrition. 3 to 4 IMO. Oh god, yes. It always feels bad when one team on either side has all their Titans out, and there's literally nothing you can do about it. I'm honestly surprised that this isn't a vanilla function, and it feels like a massive oversight on Respawn's part when it comes to pub stomping. Titanfall 2 is the better TF2. I don't know, does Titanfall 2 have this?
Now that we ate all of the ice cream, let us get back to steps.
Excellent!
Crash Site is objectively a bad map. Yeah, I said it. In some aspects, sure. While I do think Titan combat definitely suffers a bit on this map, I love the flow of close pilot combat. Besides, you can do some cool stuff with grapples on this map. The mantling animation is too slow for what's supposed to be a movement shooter. It's just not fun to feel like you're stuck in the animation when the game heavily encourages fast vertical movement. Sure, you can do a wall run, jump back, and hop over the ledge, but that takes as much time as the animation for more effort. It's most annoying on the small ridges that are just slightly too high to jump over. I'm not gonna lie, every time this happens, a little part of me dies. And I understand having the animation in the first place, but yeah, it really is way too painfully slow and jarring for what is supposed to be a fast-paced shooter. Although I guess you could say that this is a punishment for a sloppy angle. Camping is good in FPS games, fast-paced shooters. While this doesn't necessarily only apply to Titanfall, I mean, I don't really mind camping. The problem is when a game doesn't offer too many counterplays to camping. Because I mean, there's a reason why people don't like camping in the first place, because most of the time, it isn't necessarily too interesting to sit in one place, nor is it too fun to play against after a while. But it is an alternative playstyle, and as long as FPS games exist, camping will too. Hot take, the time to kill should be shorter, not longer. Apex Legends is trash compared to Titanfall 2. Not gameplay related or anything, it's just the optimization and garbage anti-cheat. I mean, if we're not comparing gameplay or anything, this is sort of a nothing take. Titanfall 2 isn't exactly a perfect game when it comes to optimizations and its anti-cheat either. That, and it's kind of hard to compare a 60-player battle royale game that is a lot more popular than its 8-year-old counterpart that supports up to around 16 players. Now, does Apex suffer from optimization and anti-cheat issues more compared to its other relevant competition? Sure. But let's not pretend that Titanfall 2 is great in that department either. Especially when in order to get something as simple as network invites, you have to be on the same data center and the same in-game language. I mean, come on now. Now, it wouldn't be a Titanfall 2 discussion video without the good old mention of Titanfall 3. And, well, there's no need to drag it out. In this modern day and age, it would be insanely surprising if we got a worthy direct successor to Titanfall 2. I mean, just look at how they're treating Apex. Not being able to get the battle pass with Apex coins, but only with real money? Talk about greedy. And of course, they had to revert that since it was painstakingly obvious that it in fact was not better for the players, when something as idiotic as this shouldn't have even been thought of in the first place. If we ever did get a Titanfall 3 though, I would love for it to go in the direction of the Battlefield series, where we would get immersive multiplayer cinematics with huge destructible environments and with tons of players on each side. And here we are at the last of the hot takes, all centered around, well, whatever we got left. The campaign isn't that great. Gameplay-wise, it's amazing, but to be honest, I saw every major plot point coming a mile away, so I just couldn't get very invested in it. Effect and Cause is still the best though, lol. Oh my god, somebody finally said it. I'm gonna be completely honest, whenever somebody says they cried at the end of Titanfall 2, or that it was a cinematic masterpiece, I can't help but go, really? I mean, sure, it has cool moments, but at the end of it all, I only really cared about Beat C, but not to the point where I'm absolutely devastated that he had perished. Let's not forget, this campaign is only around 5 hours. 5 hours isn't really a lot of time to get super invested in the characters, and as a result, the characters themselves all seem stereotypically shallow. Which is why, as controversial and convoluted as Apex Legends is, it was cool to see these characters finally feel like something more than just a shell for a narrative plot. They felt real. On that note though, Titanfall 2's characters and stories shouldn't be used as much to bolster Apex Legends. Hate the fact that Valkyrie is Viper's daughter, the Titan battery giving a legend powers is BS and it should have killed her right off the bat, and no, the sword that costs players $400 is not fit for a Titan as Ash says, the thing would be microscopic in a Titan's hands. Yeah, it definitely feels like that sometimes. The problem with Apex having so many characters is that there's a lot to keep track of, meaning that sometimes it feels like these people were just introduced to exist. Like, oh cool, Valkyrie is Viper's daughter and stuff, but then it goes nowhere. Outside of that, I feel like there's nothing else for me to really care about. Characters like Blisk are also waved around in our face, but despite being such an important role, they seldom show up or even affect the story. I will say though, all the new lore that Ash was given was pretty cool. Campaign? We never got a Legion boss fight, and Jack's dialogue is hollow/boring, and BT feels like the only one with personality in this duo. Legion boss fight? What do you mean? Jokes aside, yeah, that really sucked to see that we weren't able to even scrap with Blisk. Cooper also does really feel like a super generic guy. Like, his name is literally Jack Cooper. Super basic as hell. Apex Legends is something new and fresh, and the trilogy required a break from Titans and COD-like gameplay. I totally agree. I think a lot of people kind of underestimate what Apex Legends did for the series in general. I mean, hey, I used to love that game to death. In fact, it's probably still my most played game ever. Whether you like it or not, Apex is fundamentally a pretty fun game. Of course, it's ruined by the lack of good decisions, slow responses, and a pretty questionable culture and community. Even if Apex was created solely to cash in on the Battle Royale franchise, I've never once regretted my time with it, and honestly, I just wish it was run by better people. EA sucks. Reach is smelly. Sloan was such a lame final boss fight for the campaign, and I think Viper should have been the final boss. For such cool level designs, the combat in the campaign is relatively straightforward, and yeah, that extends to the bosses. Besides Viper, every other Titan boss in the game is a cookie-cutter bot Titan fight, except now those Titans are a bit beefier. At least Viper actually moves around dynamically and sounds cool. All that Kane and Richter do is stand there while Sloan is British! Affecting Cause is fun, but is definitely overhyped as a level. I mean, to be fair, it is one of the most interesting levels in the campaign conceptually, bar none, so I personally think the hype is warranted. My hot take, the arc tool isn't a very inventive or worthwhile gimmick, and it felt a bit weird to give it so much emphasis. I agree. The arc tool is basically just a giant laser pointer, and I feel like it would have benefited with more playtime. Imagine being able to unlock, I don't know, secret alternate paths or doors in later missions. That'd be sick. Instead, it's relegated to just being a straightforward and gimmicky tool. My late hot take is that game fight is better with just Expedition. Sure, a lot of people kind of gloss over the fact that Expedition even exists once they get their first Titan loadout, and it kind of sucks to see it fall off in the late game. And as a former Monarch main, I think the Expedition in general just scratches my brain the right way. And, oh, wow, okay, that's about it. Of course, I didn't get to everybody's hot takes, but I feel like I got a good chunk of them out of the way. If you made it this far, then congratulations! You've listened to me yap for however long this video ends up being. And that is an achievement by itself. As always, feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Every little bit helps. We also have a Discord server in the description if you want to join that, and if you want extra perks, feel free to support me by becoming a comrade through YouTube memberships. We also have networks on every Titanfall 2 platform, all under the name Reach's Comrades. And I think that's it. Now if you'll excuse me, by the time I'm done writing this, it is 3 AM and I want to go to sleep. See ya in the next one.